The autumn evening was settling over the state capitol as State Senator Thomas Walker gathered his papers after another marathon legislative session. His eyes were tired from reviewing countless amendments to the new education bill, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing the day's work would help countless students in their district. The clock on his dashboard read 9:45 p.m. as he pulled out of the parking garage in his well-maintained black Audi S6, not flashy, but fitting for a senior public servant. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. The senator's mind wandered to his morning schedule. He had promised to speak at a local high school about civic engagement. His wife had already texted twice, asking if he remembered to eat dinner. He smiled, thinking about the plate of food she'd undoubtedly kept warm for him. The radio played softly in the background, a local jazz station that helped him decompress after long days. He was just about to turn onto Highland Avenue, the familiar route he'd taken for the past 15 years of his political career, when he noticed the flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. His heart sank slightly, not out of guilt, but from experience. Even as a 58-year-old state senator with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, these encounters always carried a weight of uncertainty. Walker did everything by the book, just as he'd taught his own children. He signaled immediately, pulled over to a well-lit area near a 24-hour convenience store, and turned off his engine. His hands moved deliberately to the steering wheel, positioned at 10 and 2 o'clock. The graduation tassel from his grandson's recent ceremony swayed gently from his rearview mirror, a proud reminder of why he continued his public service. Through his side mirror, he watched the police officer approach. Even in the dim street lighting, Walker could see the officer's unusually tense posture. The beam from the officer's flashlights swept across his car's interior before settling harshly on his face. Officer Brian Thompson, as his nameplate would later reveal, was young, probably in his late 20s, with a rigid stance that spoke of either inexperience or prejudice, maybe both. License and registration, the officer barked, not even bothering with the customary greeting. His hand rested unnecessarily on his holster, a detail that didn't escape the senator's notice. Walker kept his voice steady and professional, the same tone he used during heated debates on the Senate floor. "Good evening, officer. My license is in my wallet, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now, if that's all right." He narrated his movements clearly, a habit born from years of similar encounters, despite his position of authority. The officer's flashlight beam never wavered. "Just hurry up and get them." His tone was dismissive, bordering on hostile. As Walker reached for his glove compartment, he noticed a second patrol car pulling up behind them. His heart rate picked up slightly, but his movements remained measured and calm. What should have been a routine traffic stop was already taking an unsettling turn. As he handed over his documents, including his Senate credentials, Walker quietly activated the voice recorder on his phone. Another habit he'd developed over the years, not out of paranoia but pragmatism. The officer barely glanced at the Senate ID. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he demanded, ignoring the credentials that usually commanded at least basic professional courtesy. "No, officer, I'm afraid I don't. I was following all traffic laws and signals." Walker's response was firm but polite, his years of diplomatic experience evident in every word. Officer Thompson's sneer was audible in his voice. "Your window tint looks too dark, and you made what I'd call a suspicious turn back there." Both claims were obviously false. The car's windows were factory standard, and Walker had made no unusual turns. As the situation began to unfold, neither man realized that this ordinary Tuesday evening was about to become anything but ordinary. The convenience store's security cameras whirred silently, recording every moment, while late-night customers began to notice the scene developing outside. 7 minutes would change everything. But these first moments were setting the stage for what would become a powerful lesson about authority, respect, and the ongoing struggle for equality in modern America. Through it all, Walker maintained his dignity, even as his mind raced through the implications of what was unfolding. He thought of his grandson's graduation tassel swaying in his peripheral vision, a reminder of why he fought for change through legislation rather than confrontation. But sometimes change finds you, even when you're just trying to drive home after a long day's work serving the people. The tension in the air was palpable, but this was just the beginning. As Officer Thompson strutted back to his patrol car with Walker's documents, the senator took a deep breath, knowing from experience that the next few minutes would require all of his patience and composure. The night was about to become a testament to both the challenges that remained and the power of accountability in modern law enforcement. Officer Thompson returned to Senator Walker's car with an unmistakable swagger in his step. The beam of his flashlight was even more aggressive now, sweeping across the senator's face repeatedly in what felt like a deliberate attempt to intimidate. The second patrol car's lights continued to flash, casting eerie red and blue shadows across the convenience store parking lot. "Step out of the vehicle," Thompson ordered, his voice dripping with unearned authority. The senator's hands remained visible on the steering wheel as he responded with the same measured tone he'd maintained throughout the encounter. "May I ask why that's necessary, officer?" "I've provided all the requested documentation." Walker's voice remained steady, though his heart was beating faster now. After 15 years in the state senate, he'd learned to control his outward reactions, even when facing blatant disrespect. "I don't like your attitude," Thompson snapped, rapping his knuckles against the car window. "When a police officer gives you an order, you follow it. Or do you think you're too important for that?" The senator noticed how the officer's hand had returned to his holster, a threatening gesture that wasn't lost on the small crowd beginning to gather near the convenience store entrance. The overnight clerk had stepped outside, phone in hand, watching the scene unfold with concerned interest. Walker knew this moment well. It was the crossroads where pride and wisdom often parted ways. With deliberate movements, he unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'm opening my door now, officer," he announced clearly, maintaining the professional demeanor that had earned him respect across party lines in the legislature. As he stepped out into the cool night air, Walker stood to his full height, an impressive 6'2" that usually commanded respect. But Officer Thompson seemed determined to assert his dominance. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, despite the senator's hands being clearly visible the entire time. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" Walker asked, his voice carrying just enough authority to remind Thompson that he wasn't dealing with someone who could be easily intimidated. The senator's suit jacket, slightly wrinkled from the long day at the Capitol, bore the small pin of the state senate, though Thompson seemed determined to ignore this detail. "Spread your legs and put your hands on the hood," Thompson ordered, taking an aggressive step forward. The second officer, who had remained by his car until now, finally approached. This officer, whose nameplate read Wilson, appeared older and more experienced, though he made no move to intervene. As Walker complied with the order, he could hear murmurs from the growing crowd of onlookers. Someone mentioned recognizing him from the news. He'd recently been featured for his work on education reform. The sound of phones recording became more apparent, their camera lights adding to the surreal atmosphere. "You haven't stated any probable cause for this search," Walker noted calmly, even as Thompson began an unnecessarily rough pat-down. "I'd like to understand what traffic violation you observed." Thompson's response was immediate and hostile. "You think because you're wearing an expensive suit and driving a fancy car, you can tell me how to do my job?" His hands were unnecessarily rough as they searched the senator's pockets. "For all I know, you could be anyone. These days, anyone can buy a nice car." The implications in Thompson's words hung heavy in the air. Walker's mind flashed to the framed photo on his office desk, himself standing with the governor after passing a crucial infrastructure bill. 15 years of public service, countless hours working across the aisle, and here he was, facing the very kind of treatment he'd been fighting to reform. Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably behind them, finally speaking up. "Thompson, maybe we should," but his younger colleague cut him off. "I know what I'm doing," Thompson snapped, his voice carrying across the parking lot. He pulled the senator's phone from his pocket, noticing it was recording. "Oh, so that's how it is. You were recording me this whole time?" The senator remained composed, though his patience was being tested. "It's my right as a citizen to record my interactions with law enforcement. I'm sure your body camera is doing the same thing." This seemed to anger Thompson further, his face reddening visible even in the dim light. More vehicles were slowing down now, some pulling into the parking lot. The convenience store's security cameras continued their silent vigil, capturing every moment of this escalating situation. Unknown to Thompson, one of the onlookers was a local news producer heading home from the late shift, already making calls as she watched the scene unfold. The tension in the air was building to a breaking point. Walker could feel it, the same way he could feel the mood shift in the Senate chamber before a crucial vote. But this wasn't the marble halls of the Capitol. This was a darkened parking lot where power dynamics took on a very different meaning. 7 minutes into this stop, things were about to change dramatically. But in these moments, as Walker stood with his hands on his car's hood, he represented something bigger than himself. He was every professional who'd ever been profiled, every citizen who'd faced abuse of power, and, though he didn't know it yet, he was about to become a catalyst for change in his community. The flashing lights continued their rhythmic dance across the scene, illuminating faces in the growing crowd, each witness becoming part of a story that would soon make headlines across the state. The next few moments would test everyone involved and reveal character in ways that would impact careers, change policies, and remind everyone about the true meaning of justice and accountability. The growing crowd of onlookers had created an unexpected audience for Officer Thompson's power play. The convenience store's fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the parking lot as the senator continued to stand, hands placed firmly on his car's hood. Despite the humiliating position, Walker maintained his dignity, something he'd learned to do through decades of public service. "I don't like smart people who think they know the law better than me," Thompson declared, waving the senator's phone in his hand. The recording was still running, capturing every word. "Maybe we need to take this conversation down to the station." At this point, Officer Wilson stepped forward again, his experience finally overwhelming his reluctance to intervene. "Thompson, I've seen this gentleman on TV. He's a state senator." His voice carried a note of warning that his younger colleague chose to ignore. "I don't care if he's the president," Thompson shot back, his voice rising. "He was acting suspicious, and I'm going to do my job." The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone watching, a respected state lawmaker being treated like a common criminal without cause. A tech-savvy teenager in the crowd had started a live stream, capturing everything in real time. The number of viewers was climbing rapidly as local residents recognized the senator and shared the link. Comments flooded in, expressing outrage at the treatment of a public servant known for his moderate stance and bridge-building approach to politics. Walker's mind raced through his options. As chairman of the state's Law Enforcement Oversight Committee, he knew exactly how many protocols Officer Thompson had already violated. But he also knew that escalating the situation could make things worse. His years of experience in diffusing tense legislative debates were proving valuable in an entirely different context. "Officer," Walker spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the parking lot, "I understand you're doing your job. But I need to point out that you haven't established any probable cause for this search. My window tint is factory standard, and all my driving was within legal limits. I'm happy to discuss this further, but it needs to be done properly." The growing crowd murmured in agreement. Someone near the front called out, "That's Senator Walker. He helped get our community center built." More voices joined in, phones recording every moment of this increasingly tense situation. Thompson's face reddened further, visible even in the mixed lighting of police flashes and street lamps. He grabbed the senator's arm roughly, reaching for his handcuffs. "That's it. You're interfering with a police investigation." The crowd gasped collectively. Officer Wilson finally moved to physically intervene, placing himself between his colleague and the senator. "Thompson, stand down. This has gone far enough." His voice carried the weight of experience and authority that Thompson's had been trying to fake. Meanwhile, inside the convenience store, the clerk had been making calls of his own. The security cameras continued recording as more vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Unknown to Thompson, one of those cars belonged to a member of the city council who lived nearby and had received multiple urgent messages about the situation. The senator remained remarkably composed, though the strain was visible in his face. He thought about his grandson's graduation tassel still swaying gently in his car, a reminder of why he'd spent his career working within the system to create change. Now, ironically, he found himself at the center of exactly the kind of incident he'd been working to prevent. More patrol cars were arriving now, their lights adding to the surreal atmosphere. The original traffic stop had become something much bigger. A moment that would soon force the department to confront its issues with racial profiling and abuse of power. Walker could hear snippets of conversation from the crowd, This is exactly what he was warning us about in his last town hall. Someone needs to call the chief. Is this really happening to a state senator? The livestream's viewer count had hit 5 figures, with people across the state tuning in to watch this abuse of power unfold in real time. Comments flooded in from constituents, colleagues, and citizens shocked by the treatment of their elected official. Officer Thompson's grip on the handcuffs tightened, his knuckles white with tension. The power dynamic he tried to establish was crumbling around him, but he seemed unable or unwilling to recognize it. His next actions would prove to be his undoing, a textbook example of power corrupted by prejudice. In the distance, sirens could be heard approaching. Someone in the crowd announced that local news vans were on their way. What had started as a routine traffic stop had transformed into a pivotal moment for the community, one that would soon demonstrate how quickly karma can catch up to those who abuse their authority. The next few moments would dramatically change the trajectory of several careers and spark a long-overdue conversation about police reform. As the situation teetered on the edge of a major confrontation, no one realized that the most dramatic turn was yet to come. In just a few minutes, everything would change, and Officer Thompson would learn a harsh lesson about the consequences of prejudice and power abuse. The convenience store parking lot had transformed into an impromptu town square. The crowd continued to grow as word spread through social media and text messages. The livestream count was now approaching 20,000 viewers, with people across the state watching the confrontation unfold in real time. A local reporter who lived nearby had arrived on the scene, professionally dressed but wearing sneakers, clearly having rushed out as soon as she heard what was happening. Her presence added another layer of legitimacy to the gathering crowd. She kept her distance but held her phone steady, documenting everything with the trained eye of a veteran journalist. "I'm going to count to 3, Officer Thompson announced, still holding his handcuffs, his voice betraying a growing uncertainty. The situation had spiraled far beyond his control, though he seemed unable to admit it. "If you don't comply, I'll have to use force." Senator Walker remained perfectly still, his hands still on the hood of his car. Years of political experience had taught him the power of staying calm in chaos. "Officer Thompson," he said, his voice clear and measured, "I want to make sure your body camera is recording everything clearly. Would you state again why you've escalated a routine traffic stop to this point?" The question hung in the air like a spotlight, highlighting the absurdity of the situation. Officer Wilson, the more experienced cop, had positioned himself strategically between his younger colleague and the senator. His discomfort with the situation was now plainly visible. From the crowd, someone shouted, "He's the chairman of the Police Oversight Committee." Another voice added, "He helped pass the body camera law." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone watching. The very legislator who had fought for police accountability was now experiencing firsthand why those laws were necessary. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Through the sea of phone lights and police flashes, more patrol cars were arriving. One of them carried Lieutenant Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of the force who had worked with Senator Walker on community policing initiatives. Thompson started his count, his voice slightly shaking now. 1. The livestream comments were flooding in so fast they became almost unreadable. Views had jumped to 30,000. People were tagging news stations, sharing the video, and demanding answers from city officials. 2. Officer Wilson's hand was now firmly on Thompson's shoulder. "Think very carefully about your next move, rookie," he warned, his voice low but firm. The younger officer's face showed the first signs of realizing just how badly he had mishandled the situation. Before 3 could leave Thompson's lips, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "THOMPSON. Stand down immediately." Lieutenant Rodriguez had emerged from her vehicle, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority. The lieutenant's arrival marked a dramatic shift in the energy of the scene. She quickly took control, her presence both authoritative and calming. "Senator Walker," she called out, her tone respectful and professional, "I apologize for this situation. Please feel free to return to a normal standing position." As Walker straightened up, the crowd broke into applause. The senator adjusted his suit jacket with dignity, never losing the composed demeanor that had earned him respect across party lines. Lieutenant Rodriguez was already on her radio, calling for internal affairs to respond to the scene. Officer Thompson's face had drained of color as reality finally set in. His hand, still gripping the handcuffs, began to tremble slightly. The body camera on his chest continued recording, capturing every moment of his dramatic fall from authority. The local reporter stepped forward, maintaining a professional distance, but close enough to document the scene. "Senator Walker, would you like to make a statement about what just occurred?" she asked, her phone still recording. Walker straightened his tie and spoke with the measured tone of a seasoned public servant. "What happened here tonight is exactly why we've been pushing for police reform. Not to punish officers, but to protect both the public and the good officers who serve them properly. This incident will be reviewed through the proper channels." Lieutenant Rodriguez was already reviewing the body camera footage on her tablet, her expression growing darker with each passing moment. Officer Wilson had begun writing his incident report, knowing it would be crucial in the coming investigation. The crowd's phones captured everything. The way Thompson's swagger had vanished, the professional response of the senior officers, and most importantly, the dignity with which Senator Walker handled the entire situation. The contrast between Thompson's behavior and the senator's composure couldn't have been more stark. News vans were now pulling into the parking lot, their bright lights adding to the surreal atmosphere. The story was spreading across social media like wildfire, with clips of the livestream being shared thousands of times per minute. The convenience store clerk, who had witnessed everything from the beginning, was already being interviewed by another reporter who had arrived on scene. His security footage would soon become crucial evidence in what was quickly becoming a watershed moment for police accountability in the state. As Lieutenant Rodriguez escorted Thompson to her car to begin the official internal affairs process, the young officer finally seemed to understand the magnitude of his actions. His night of power tripping had turned into a career-defining mistake, all because he had chosen to harass the wrong person for the wrong reasons. But more than just a story about karma, this incident was about to become a powerful catalyst for change. As the media gathered and the crowd continued to grow, no one realized that this was just the beginning. The next few minutes would set in motion a series of events that would reshape police training and accountability across the entire state. The night air buzzed with activity as Police Chief Richardson's unmarked car pulled into the convenience store parking lot. His arrival marked a significant escalation in the department's response. The chief had been at a family dinner when the calls started pouring in, first from concerned citizens, then from city council members, and finally from the mayor himself. Even before stepping out of his vehicle, the chief could see this was no ordinary incident. The parking lot looked like a movie set, news vans with satellite dishes, dozens of phones recording, and a crowd that had swelled to over 100 people. The convenience store's normally quiet lot had become the epicenter of what would soon become a viral story about justice and accountability. Lieutenant Rodriguez met the chief halfway, tablet in hand. "Sir, you need to see this footage," she said, her voice tight with professional concern. The chief watched the body camera video, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. Thompson's aggressive behavior, the baseless escalation, the clear prejudice in his actions, it was all there in high definition. Meanwhile, Senator Walker was speaking calmly with several reporters, his composure unchanged despite the ordeal he'd just experienced. "This isn't about me," he explained, his voice carrying the same thoughtful tone he used on the Senate floor. "This is about every citizen who doesn't have the protection of a public office. This is about making sure our police officers have the right training and oversight to serve everyone equally." The livestream count had now passed 50,000 viewers. Comments were pouring in from across the country, with many people sharing similar experiences. The incident was quickly becoming a symbol of both what needed to change in law enforcement and how that change could be achieved through proper channels. Chief Richardson approached the senator, his face showing genuine concern and professional respect. "Senator Walker, on behalf of the department, I want to personally apologize for this incident." The chief's voice carried both authority and sincerity. "I assure you this will be thoroughly investigated." The senator nodded, maintaining his diplomatic approach. "Chief, I think we both know this is an opportunity. The Oversight Committee has been pushing for enhanced training programs. Perhaps this incident can help us secure the funding we need." As they spoke, Officer Thompson sat in the back of Lieutenant Rodriguez's car, watching his career crumble through the window. His earlier bravado had been replaced by a pale, shocked expression as he realized the full implications of his actions. The young officer who had started his shift thinking he could bully anyone was about to become an example of why reform was necessary. The convenience store owner had come out now, offering water to people in the crowd and speaking with reporters about what he'd witnessed. "I've known Senator Walker for years," he told them. "He stops in sometimes after late sessions, always polite, always asks about my family. When I saw how that officer was treating him, I couldn't believe it." Social media was exploding with activity. The hashtag Senator Walker was trending statewide, with people sharing clips of his previous speeches about police reform, his work on community initiatives, and his reputation for building bridges between law enforcement and the community. Chief Richardson was already coordinating with his public affairs team, knowing this incident would require complete transparency. Body camera footage would need to be released, reports would need to be filed, and most importantly, real changes would need to be implemented. The crowd had started to thin slightly, but those who remained were engaged in serious discussions about police accountability and community relations. What had started as a routine traffic stop had transformed into a teachable moment for the entire department. Lieutenant Rodriguez was interviewing witnesses, ensuring every perspective was documented. Officer Wilson, who had tried to intervene, was providing his statement about Thompson's behavior and his own attempts to de-escalate the situation. Local civil rights leaders had begun arriving, having been alerted by the viral livestream. They spoke with reporters about the broader implications of the incident, but also praised the department's swift response. This wasn't just about one bad officer, it was about creating systemic change. Senator Walker's phone was buzzing constantly with messages from colleagues, constituents, and even the governor's office. But his focus remained on turning this incident into something positive. He spoke with Chief Richardson about immediate steps they could take to improve training and accountability. The convenience store's security cameras continued recording as history unfolded in their parking lot. The footage would later be used in police training academies across the state, showing both how quickly a situation could escalate and how maintaining professionalism could de-escalate it. As midnight approached, the scene had transformed from a confrontation into a constructive dialogue about police reform. Chief Richardson and Senator Walker stood together, discussing practical steps forward, their conversation captured by news cameras and demonstrating how leadership should respond to crisis. This wasn't just karma striking back at one officer's prejudice, it was becoming a catalyst for real change. The next few days would see policy reforms, training updates, and a renewed commitment to community policing. Sometimes, positive change comes from the most unexpected moments, even from a routine traffic stop on a quiet Tuesday night. The morning after the incident, the police department's conference room was filled to capacity. Chief Richardson had called an emergency meeting at 7 a.m., and the tension in the room was palpable. The video of Officer Thompson's conduct had gone viral overnight, gaining millions of views and sparking discussions across the country. "This stops today," the chief announced, standing before his assembled command staff. The normally routine morning briefing had become a crucial moment for the department. On the screen behind him, news channels were running the convenience store's security footage on a constant loop, showing Thompson's aggressive behavior toward the senator. Meanwhile, at the state capitol, Senator Walker's office was overwhelmed with calls and emails. His staff struggled to keep up with the surge of support from constituents and fellow lawmakers. The senator himself had arrived early, determined to channel this incident into meaningful change rather than just headlines. "We've received calls from every major news network," his assistant reported, juggling multiple ringing phones. The senator nodded, reviewing the police reform bill he'd been trying to pass for months. The document that had been stuck in committee suddenly seemed more relevant than ever. Back at the police department, Officer Thompson sat in the Internal Affairs office, his uniform replaced by civilian clothes. The young officer who had started his shift with such arrogance now looked small behind the desk as investigators reviewed his body camera footage frame by frame. "Walk us through your thought process," the Internal Affairs investigator prompted, her voice professional but firm. Thompson struggled to explain his actions, each attempt making it clearer that his conduct had been driven by prejudice rather than procedure. The department's training officer, a veteran with 25 years of experience, watched the footage with growing concern. "This is exactly what we teach officers not to do," he noted, marking specific moments where Thompson had violated multiple department policies. The bodycam footage had become a perfect example of what not to do in police training. Around noon, Chief Richardson held a press conference on the steps of the police headquarters. Camera flashes lit up the scene as he addressed the gathered media. "We are announcing immediate changes to our training protocols," he declared. "What happened last night was unacceptable, and we are taking concrete steps to ensure it never happens again." Inside the Capitol building, Senator Walker was meeting with the Police Oversight Committee. The room was packed with lawmakers who had previously been hesitant about reform. Now, with the viral video playing on their phones, their resistance had melted away. "Sometimes it takes a personal experience to open eyes," Walker told his colleagues, his voice carrying the same calm authority it had maintained throughout the previous night's ordeal. "But this isn't about me. It's about making sure every citizen is treated with respect and dignity." The police union representative, watching the proceedings from the back of the room, knew this was a turning point. The usual defensive stance wouldn't work this time. The evidence was too clear, the public outrage too strong. It was time for cooperation rather than resistance. By mid-afternoon, Officer Thompson's fate had been decided. The internal affairs investigation had moved at record speed, pushed by the overwhelming evidence and public pressure. Chief Richardson announced the officer's immediate suspension without pay, pending termination proceedings. But the department didn't stop there. The chief unveiled a comprehensive new training program developed in consultation with community leaders and civil rights experts. "We're not just removing one officer," he explained to reporters. "We're changing the culture that allowed this to happen." The convenience store owner had become something of a local hero, praised for his quick thinking in preserving the security footage. "I just did what was right," he told reporters who gathered at his store. "When you see something wrong, you have to speak up." Social media continued to buzz with activity. The hashtag had evolved from hashtag Senator Walker to hashtag #PolicyReformNow, with citizens sharing their own stories and calling for change. The incident had sparked a national conversation about police accountability and community relations. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had handled the scene so professionally the night before, was appointed to lead the department's new community outreach program. Her calm handling of the situation had shown exactly the kind of leadership the department needed. Officer Wilson, who had tried to intervene during Thompson's power trip, found himself being interviewed by the department's training division. His attempts to de-escalate the situation would become part of future training scenarios, showing officers how to step in when they witness misconduct. As evening approached, Senator Walker finally took a moment to call his family. His grandson, whose graduation tassels still hung in his car, had seen the video online. "You stayed so calm, Grandpa," the boy said, pride evident in his voice. "You showed them what real strength looks like." The senator smiled, thinking about how this incident would affect future generations. Sometimes positive change comes from difficult moments, he reflected. The key was not to seek revenge, but to push for lasting reform that would benefit everyone in the community. 1 month had passed since that fateful night at the convenience store, and the changes across the state were remarkable. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the state capitol as Senator Walker stood at the podium, addressing a packed chamber. His police reform bill, once stalled in committee, had just passed with overwhelming support. "Today marks not an ending, but a beginning," Walker announced, his voice carrying the same steady confidence that had helped him maintain composure during his encounter with Officer Thompson. The gallery erupted in applause, filled with faces that told the story of a community united for change. The convenience store owner sat in the front row of the gallery, beaming with pride. His small business had become a symbol of community vigilance and civic responsibility. Local schools now invited him to speak about the importance of standing up for what's right, and his security footage had become a powerful teaching tool in police academies across the state. Former Officer Thompson's story had taken an unexpected turn. After his termination from the force, he'd gone through a period of deep reflection. Now he was working with anti-bias training programs, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. "I let power go to my head," Thompson admitted in a recent interview. "I forgot that a badge means serving the community, not controlling it." His honest acknowledgement of his mistakes had become part of the department's training materials, showing that real change was possible when people admitted their wrongs and learned from them. Chief Richardson had implemented sweeping changes throughout the department. Every officer now wore upgraded body cameras that automatically activated during any civilian interaction. Weekly community meetings had become mandatory, allowing officers to build real relationships with the people they served. Lieutenant Rodriguez's community outreach program had become a model for other departments across the country. She'd created a mentorship initiative pairing veteran officers with community youth, breaking down barriers that had existed for generations. The program was already showing promising results, with improved trust between police and local residents. The convenience store parking lot, once the scene of confrontation, had been transformed into a monthly meeting spot for community police dialogue sessions. Officers and citizens would gather there, sharing coffee and conversation, working together to build understanding and trust. Senator Walker's grandson had written a school essay about that night, describing how his grandfather's calm strength had shown him what real leadership looked like. The essay went viral on social media, touching hearts and inspiring discussions about dignity under pressure. The police academy had completely revamped its training program. New recruits now spent more time learning about community relations and de-escalation techniques. The security footage from that night was used to teach future officers about both what not to do and how to handle difficult situations professionally. Officer Wilson, who had tried to intervene during Thompson's misconduct, had been promoted to head the department's new accountability unit. His experience had shown the importance of having good officers speak up when they witnessed wrongdoing. "We're only as good as our willingness to hold each other accountable," became his unit's motto. The local news station had won an award for their coverage of the incident and its aftermath. Their reporting had helped transform a potentially divisive incident into a catalyst for positive change. The reporter who first arrived on scene that night had been promoted to lead anchor, her fair and balanced coverage earning her the community's trust. Social media had played a crucial role in spreading awareness, but now it was being used to share success stories. The department's community engagement posts regularly went viral, showing officers and citizens working together to build a better community. The convenience store's security cameras still recorded every day, but now they captured a different story. One of officers stopping by to chat with customers, community meetings in the parking lot, and the gradual healing of old wounds through understanding and respect. Senator Walker had kept his grandson's graduation tassel hanging in his car. "It reminds me that everything we do today shapes tomorrow," he explained during a recent interview. That night could have ended in anger and division. Instead, it became a stepping stone toward real change. The state's police training budget had tripled, with new emphasis on cultural awareness and community relations. Other states were beginning to adopt similar reforms, using the incident as a case study in how to transform a crisis into an opportunity for growth. As the sun set on another day at the state capitol, Senator Walker looked out over the city he'd served for so many years. The lights of police cruisers patrolling the streets no longer carried the same tension they once did. Instead, they had become symbols of a new kind of policing, one based on respect, understanding, and true public service. "Sometimes," Walker often said, "the most powerful changes come from our most challenging moments." His words had become a motto for the reform movement, reminding everyone that positive change was possible when people chose wisdom over anger and progress over revenge.